What is it about the car that is proving so tricky for you?
Nothing, just lack of talent.
The 2023 Qatar Grand Prix saw Oscar Piastri secure his first ever pole position and first ever win for McLaren and his F1 career. Although he did both of them in the sprint, they are still quite significant. What made it even more significant was the fact that he did that even before Lando Norris could achieve it for the team. And somewhere down the line, you could see that Lando Norris was unhappy at the level of his performance that weekend. The fact that Oscar Piastri can turn up in his very first season in F1 and be the first to win a race before Lando Norris could achieve that, it speaks volumes. It speaks volumes about the kind of talent that we have in Formula 1 right now. So much so that one cannot help but correlate to something that happened around 5 to 6 years ago. And it happened at Red Bull between Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen. So the question at this stage is, what happened between Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen at Red Bull? Could the same be emulated at McLaren by Oscar Piastri? Now before we proceed, I have one request from you guys, and that request is, if you are new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button, and if you have still not liked this video, please like this video because, well, as you can see, it is still a very young and very small channel. Every small action from you guys is going to help me grow. Let's get back to the video. Now before we talk about the Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri dynamics, I think it is important that first we take a look at what happened between Max Verstappen and Daniel Ricciardo at Red Bull. Now talking about the Daniel Ricciardo Max Verstappen dynamics at Red Bull, Max Verstappen joined Daniel Ricciardo at Red Bull in 2016. At that point in time, Daniel Ricciardo was the established driver within the team, and he was also considered one of the best drivers on the grid. As time passed, Max Verstappen slowly but steadily started outperforming Daniel, and by the 2018 season, he was clearly the lead driver at Red Bull. So much so that, well, Daniel Ricciardo saw the writing on the wall and decided it was time to move to another team. It was around that time that Daniel Ricciardo moved from Red Bull to Renault, and we all know what happened afterwards. Now, when we're talking about Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris at McLaren, this is precisely what we're looking at. We are looking at a scenario where Oscar Piastri turns up to McLaren, a team where Lando Norris is the established driver and is considered one of the best drivers on the grid. We are expecting Oscar Piastri to ultimately, slowly but steadily outperform Lando Norris so that in due time, Lando Norris is the driver that leaves McLaren. Can Oscar Piastri get it done? Can Oscar Piastri be the driver that outperforms Lando Norris to such an extent that Norris either has to be the supporting cast or has to leave the team altogether? Now to answer this question, we have to take a look at both the scenarios. The first scenario where, well, we expect Oscar Piastri to ultimately outperform Lando Norris at McLaren. To do that, we take a look at the factors that could play a role in Oscar Piastri being the future team leader at McLaren. On the other hand, we take a look at the scenario where Oscar Piastri is unable to do that and Lando Norris continues to enjoy the superiority at McLaren. And to do this, we also take a look at the factors that could play a role. So now let's break it down. First of all, let's take a look at the factors that could ultimately contribute to Oscar Piastri becoming the driver that outperforms Lando Norris and becomes the lead driver at McLaren. Now when we talk about Oscar ultimately outperforming Lando Norris, there is something that not everybody knows about the Australian, and that is how he has evolved over the years in junior categories. When Oscar first jumped up to car racing, it wasn't all smooth sailing for him. He won the titles in every consecutive championship, but it was not as if he won it dominantly. In fact, in Formula 3, the last race of the season, Oscar Piastri would have lost the title if Logan Sargeant had not crashed in the final race. Well, that was fortunate, right? However, things changed from his jump from Formula 3 to Formula 2, because from that jump, Oscar Piastri was unreachable. The jump and the level up that he had from Formula 3 to Formula 2 is something that is quite surprising, because in Formula 3, he almost lost the title to Théo Pourchaire, someone who is going to win the title this season in Formula 2, by the way, 2 years later. In just his rookie year, Piastri dominated the field. He leveled up to such an extent that even his compatriots that used to give him trouble, they were no match to him anymore. Even in the first year in Formula 1, we can see this happening. Logan Sargeant has been one of the more competitive drivers and teammates for Oscar Piastri. He has almost always outqualified Oscar when they were teammates. Yet, in Formula 1 in the rookie season, while we have Oscar Piastri winning his first ever race, Logan Sargent is yet to score a point and is struggling to keep his seat. That is the kind of leveling up that Oscar has done, which his compatriots have been unable to do. Oscar has this ability to learn and grow. It's not entirely about talent, it's about hard work and learning on the job, and that is what Oscar has been doing brilliantly. Next up, something that stands out for Oscar even more is the fact that if we compare Oscar to Lando Norris, there is one thing that stands out a little more than usual in other teammates, and that is the composure that the Australian has. You look at Lando, you see someone who wears his heart on his sleeve. You see Oscar, you see a driver who is very confident, but he does not express too many emotions. He keeps things within himself. He has a bit of a dry humor, but it's not too expressive. He does not let on too many things, and he does not let too many things affect him as well. That is precisely why he was able to keep calm and even beat Lando Norris to pole position in the sprint qualifying. The driver has one thing over Norris, and that is the fact that he does not get too emotional. And composure is arguably something that every F1 legend has, and that is where every legend thrives while others fail. Finally, now looking at the third point, and the third point is the fact that Oscar Piastri is still in his first season in Formula 1. He is not someone who has been in the sport for too long, and in his very first season, he out-qualified and beat one of the best drivers on the grid. Just try to understand the kind of growth curve that Oscar has had. It just shows that the driver still has a long way to go, and even at this current level where he's probably reached around 80% of his potential, he's still able to match up with Norris and sometimes even beat him. So when you take these things into consideration, it does appear that a driver like Oscar Piastri might just be a bit too much for Norris, and ultimately as time passes and as maybe a year or two pass, we might see Oscar Piastri finally take over at McLaren, and Norris might have to find a new home or maybe take the supporting role. Now let's take a look at the counter argument of this. Now when we talk about the counter argument, there are three crucial areas where I feel maybe we might not see the similar scenario that happened with Max Verstappen and Daniel Ricciardo. Now the first of them is the age gap. When we talk about Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen, there was around 7 to 8 years of age gap between the two drivers. And when you have such a huge age gap, it shows on field and it shows in experience. Earlier in Max Verstappen's career, he was very inexperienced, very raw. There was huge amount of talent, but application was still not there. And that's where Ricciardo used to take advantage. Now you compare that with Norris and Oscar Piastri. It's only a 1 year age gap. The thing that people every time forget is that Norris was able to reach Formula 1 as a teenager. Oscar Piastri has reached Formula 1 at the age of 21, 22. And while he might be a bit younger than Norris, there's an age gap of 1 year. It's not huge. And what that means is the two drivers are at the same phase of their careers where they're still learning. They've been racing in essence for almost a similar amount of time. And that is why maybe the kind of peaks that the two drivers reach, they might not be too far apart, especially if you contrast it with the way it was with Ricciardo and Max Verstappen. Now the second point is the general lack of experience that Lando Norris has. Many people forget that Lando Norris has fought at the front of the grid only for the first time in his career this season. Before this season, he pretty much had a midfield car. Even in 2021, when he bagged a few podiums, the car was still a midfield car. It wasn't better than that. This season is the first time that he has a car capable of fighting for the podium with regularity. And that is something that takes some time to get used to. And that is where maybe Norris is making a few mistakes here and there, and Oscar is able to capitalize. When we talk about the growth curve and reaching the final peak, even in the case of Lando Norris, that peak is still quite far away. Even he has a lot of growing up to do. Even he has to find his way through various situations that have still not presented itself in front of him in his career, at least until now. He might have to fight for wins with regularity. He might have to fight for podiums, pole positions with drivers like Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. He's yet to do that, and that is a learning that is still left for him to do. So until we see the final product that Lando Norris will be, it's hard to comment on how good or bad he's going to be. And now finally, the most important thing, the gap between the two drivers in terms of performance is still quite big. While the final result in case of both the races in the sprint as well as the race, it was in favor of Oscar Piastri, but there was one thing that we maybe forgot or maybe we missed because we focused too much on the result. And that was the fact that Lando Norris was still a much quicker driver of the two in the race. Norris made a mistake in qualifying and hence he lost out. Norris made a mistake in the sprint qualifying and hence he lost out again. However, in both of those races, if Norris had not made the mistake, he was still going to be ahead. And at the end of the day, it's the performance that matters. It's a common saying that you can make a fast driver make less mistakes, but you cannot make a slow driver drive fast. So yes, Lando Norris maybe has a few rough edges, they can be worked on. But since he still has a huge performance advantage over Oscar, who knows if Oscar can actually close the gap? We don't. We can sit here and predict and maybe make some judgments, but there is still a decent gap between the two drivers, and maybe it's not going to be that plain sailing for the Australian to close down the gap. So now I've shared both the sides of the coin with you guys. I've shared both scenarios that could be possible and the factors that could contribute to them. Now, in my view, if you want my opinion, I think it's very hard to predict which side it is going to go. At least for now, I feel we are not going to have the Max Verstappen, Daniel Ricciardo dynamics, because I don't expect either of the two drivers to establish such an advantage that the other driver gets dominated. I feel the two drivers are going to be neck and neck in terms of performance, and that is what my prediction is, more or less. I don't expect either of the two drivers to ultimately steal the march over the others. While yes, there is a possibility that one of the two might leave McLaren in the future, could be either of the two, but it's not going to be because of the performance. It's going to be because, well, two alpha drivers in the same team, it just does not work out ever. So yes, this is my opinion. But what do you guys think in this case? Where do you feel Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris dynamics will end up? Will we see something similar to what happened between Verstappen and Daniel Ricciardo, where Max was able to overtake and outperform the Australian? Or will we see something different, where we have two drivers that are very competitive against each other and they take points off each other in consequent races? Do let me know what you think. Drop your views in the comment section. Also, please like the video. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you next time.